For the last 4 years, I've been leading a team of undergraduate researchers to develop a nanoparticle-based technology capable of improving the imaging of brain tumors. We hypothesized that this technology could actually improve tumor resection and therefore improve patient outcomes. But in order to test this hypothesis, our first step was to actually create an animal model of a brain tumor. So early December 2021, my students and I begin this process using mice. In order to create this tumor model, the first thing that we needed to do was put the mice under general anesthesia. Once the mice are asleep, we can then align their skulls very carefully using ear bars, and this keeps their skull in place. From there, the students actually perform an incision on the skull, which then exposes the bone. The students then need to locate the location where the two pieces of the skull actually come together, and that's called the bregma. At the bregma, these students perform a burr hole, which then exposes the brain tissue to allow for the tumor cells to be injected. Following the injection, they close up the skull, and they actually perform sutures on the incision that they previously performed. This is a legitimate brain surgery, and I am sitting here in this room advising undergraduate students on how to do this. It's shocking to me that I was able to make it this far, and let me tell you why. What you'll see here is my undergraduate transcript. I was an extremely average performer, if not sometimes below average, right? My grades are full of B's, they're full of C's, they're full of C minuses. You know what hurts more than a 2.0 on your transcript? A 1.8. Some of you guys at Clemson don't have to experience that, so you're welcome. But what I also see when I look at this transcript is a girl who had a lot of other stuff going on. So my sophomore year, it's my very first semester as a chemical engineering student, I find out that my father is in a coma. That's not even the hardest part of my story. Because I was 19 years old and legally an adult, and because my parents were divorced, I was next of kin. If you don't know what that means that I was responsible for my father's health care while he was in a coma. Now, he was hospitalized 170 miles away from where I was at school. I did not own a car. So every weekend, I was borrowing friends' cars, making the drive down to Virginia Beach, where he was in the hospital, where doctors really struggled to communicate with me about the gravity of my father's situation because I was a child. During the week, I was fielding frequent phone calls from nurses and doctors asking to perform emergent procedures on my dad. Can we give your father a tracheotomy? Your dad needs a blood transfusion. Do we have your permission? This was really hard. Ultimately, after a couple of weeks of this, I was the one who had to make the call to decide to take him off life support, ending his life. Now, that experience was really hard, but it shaped the way that I decide to lead my team today. Because clearly, my grades were not indicative of my ability to be successful. So the first thing this experience taught me was how to lead with compassion. So most of my professors didn't know what was going on in my life. And as a professor now, I can recognize that I don't know what's going on in my students' lives. Currently, social and educational pressures are at an all-time high for our student population. The American Psychological Association reported that adults aged 18 to 23, which are the students that we teach, reported the highest levels of stress due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's really important to recognize that 80% of these adults actually identified education as being a major source of their stress. So what can we do to actually make this better as professors? Well, a team of researchers found that through compassionate leadership, we can actually help to alleviate some of this stress burden in our students' lives. So what do compassionate leaders look like, and what do they do? Well, they're full of encouragement. I bet you don't know, but the way that you choose to give feedback to people actually changes the way that their brain responds. a team of researchers identified that if you tell somebody, and let's talk about students, if you tell a student that they really should have done better, you're activating their sympathetic nervous system. This causes them to release cortisol. It causes their blood vessels to constrict, which leads to them entering into the fight or flight response. In this fight or flight response, nobody is learning. I know that you have all felt what this feels like me getting up here deciding to give you this talk, okay? But if you make a small shift, and instead of saying, you really should have known this material, you say, I believe you could have done better, or you could make some changes to see some improvement. Instead of activating the sympathetic nervous system, you actually activate their parasympathetic nervous system. Instead of releasing cortisol, they're releasing oxytocin. Their vessels, instead of constricting, are beginning to dilate. They become open to the experience of actually learning and growing. But feedback and compassionate leadership is only one part, because feedback will never be received in an environment that is not psychologically safe. As professors, it is our job to create a psychologically safe environment. This type of environment is marked by increased risk-taking, lack of fear of failure, and opportunities for everyone to speak. As a professor, it's my responsibility to make sure that both my laboratory and my classroom are marked by this safety. A small way you can do this is by identifying some of your own weak spots. So I'm an engineering professor. If anyone's ever studied engineering and math, you might know you need to use a lot of Greek letters, right? I'll let you in on a secret. I don't know any Greek letters, almost at all. So when I'm in class and I decide to start writing up an equation that involves one of these types of letters, I write it down, I make a wild guess, my students laugh, they tell me I'm wrong, and we move forward with the derivation. Just by that small action, my students get to see that it's okay not to know everything, that it's okay to make a mistake, and I am still a leader even though I have some weak spots. Now, in this environment marked by psychological safety, a side effect of this is increased innovation. Students are willing to take risks. And you know what happens when you take a risk, you're likely to fail. So it's important that we teach our students how to bounce back and be resilient after these moments of failure. In my spare time, I coach cross country at a local high school, so I'm very passionate about running. And this example of running provides a good indication of how we can bounce back. In 2019, Eliud Kipchoge became the first person to ever break the 2-hour marathon. It was previously considered to be an impossible feat. This means that for 26.2 miles, he was running at a 4-minute and 35-second per mile pace. Unbelievable. I could never dream of running 1 mile that fast. But 2019 was not the first time Kipchoge attempted to do this. The first time he tried to run the marathon in under 2 hours was in 2017 in a documentary that you can watch in which he failed. So after this moment of failure, Kipchoge had two options. He could quit, he could throw in the towel. How many times have we made that decision? It's the easier decision. Or he could innovate. He could change his approach and he could try again. And clearly, that's what he decided to do. He broke barriers that we never thought were possible. He innovated and he reached his goal. As a teacher, as a leader, as a coach, I try and lead with this mentality. If today is not your day, that's okay. How many times have we all had a bad day? But we get back up, we toe the line again together as a team, we come up with new ways to reach our goal, and we continually try again. As a professor in the classroom, facilitating this growth looks a little bit different. But in a safe environment, what I've found is that my students will come to me when they're afraid that they're not doing a good job. And in those moments, I have the opportunity to ask them interpersonal questions that help them identify their beliefs about themselves. Typically, what I have found is that students are capable of doing all of these things. They are smart enough to accomplish anything they want to accomplish. but they don't believe that they are. Most of my students suffer from crises of confidence and not from crises of understanding. So these 3 tenets of mentorship sound great, but do they actually work in practice? I'm here to tell you that I believe they do. So I teach sophomores in arguably one of the hardest courses in the chemical engineering curriculum, thermodynamics. For a long time, I was a mutually hated faculty member because the material is pretty hard. But during the pandemic in the spring of 2021, I decided we needed to change something. I decided to share the story about my father with my students. I told them what I had been through with the sole purpose of letting them know that I was aware they might be going through something. I told them I was open to have conversations with them, that I wanted to know their stories, and I wanted to be flexible with them, and they just needed to come to me. It was hard to share that story with my students, but the outcome was beautiful. Students began coming to me and telling me parts of their stories. This gave me opportunities to help ask those self-reflective questions, which led to students actually improving. My classroom dynamic improved dramatically, and this is shown by my teaching evaluations, which went skyrocketingly high above the college average. It's important to note I changed nothing else. I told one small story in the front of a class. My notes were the same, the way I assessed their knowledge was the same, but they believed that I taught them better. Because I chose to be vulnerable with my students, they were vulnerable with me in return. I respected their experience, and they respected me in return. Not only that, but their scores on their annual assessments in thermodynamics, the fundamentals of engineering exam, actually improved. So they learned the material better. I recently shared this experience at a faculty forum here on campus, and a fellow professor asked me, if this works so well, why did it take you 4 years to integrate it? The only thing I could say was that vulnerability is extremely hard. Standing in front of a group of people that you are leading and telling them that you are not perfect is not an easy thing to do. But it's not as hard as brain surgery. Thank you.